all to our showroom. Tonight, we have DXA Studio. Architecture design firm. Architecture design firm DXA Studio provides a rare balance of expertly crafted design with technical proficiency. Established in 2011, DXA has expertise spanning the full spectrum of services and project categories, including multi- and single-family residential, commercial, institutional, and hotel design. Co-founders Jordan Rogove and Wayne Norbeck established DXA to create a distinct identity, clarity, and ingenuity design process, believing in the power of architecture to positively influence the lives of all that engage it. Their leadership guides the team to identify opportunities to push boundaries and integrate technologies or technological advances in building materials, construction, and sustainable strategies. Their unique process allows the firm to produce creative solutions, distinctive design work that consistently outperforms expectations. Their current book, DXA New York City, available tonight, sold by McNally Jackson, touches upon the deep, inextricable relationship between the unique past and future potential of architecture that defines DXA's practice. Now, for many of you who have not been here at the showroom, Dome Interiors represents a highly curated and select group of Italian products that are committed to sustainability and good design. Kitchens, doors, closets, and bathroom systems, as well as furniture and lighting. We have locations in Chicago, Minneapolis, and LA. I'd also like to thank Brian Yefremont, the principal of Dome Interiors, for hosting this event tonight. And on November 16th, we'll host a conversation with architect Brian Masana, Masana O'Rourke, and Erie Magazine design editor Wendy Goodman. Please welcome DXA New York.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate you guys coming. We had a couple more RSVPs, but you guys are the ones that we really are enjoying at the moment. Thank you to Nicholas for hosting the events. We really appreciate everything that you've done to put this on. So my name is Wayne Norbeck. I'm a partner at DXA Studio. I'd like to also introduce Jordan Rogove. We co-founded the office back in 2011, and most recently have released our book, DXA NYC, 10 Years of Building on History. And also wanted to give a special shout out actually to Excel for all your hard work on the monograph. It was an amazing effort.
Yay.
While we do a lot of projects sort of around the country and also internationally in different locations, the bread and butter or the bulk of our work is in New York. We have a very special relationship to the city. So when we set out to do the book, we really wanted to sort of share our firm's experience and sort of sensibilities in terms of creating meaningful connections to the sites that we have here in New York, and also really bring out and make a strong relationship to the history and the stories and sort of the narratives that come about with those particular sites. So what we'd like to do tonight is take you on a bit of a journey through some interesting moments in New York's history and how those relate to the projects that we've done and the kind of the work that's come out of that sort of dialogue between the history and the architecture. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jordan.
So I'm Jordan. As Wayne said, thank you guys for coming out tonight, and thank you, Nicholas. We are kind of reprising our role in what that began this book. This book started as a lecture. Wayne and I are alumni of Virginia Tech, College of Architecture, and continue to teach down there. And I'd say maybe about three years ago, right before the pandemic, we went down and we gave a lecture, and we kind of realized that our projects rely so heavily on a quest for authenticity, and that quest really frequently was informed very strongly by our understanding of the history and context of the city. And at the heart of that quest is a question that we had throughout our practice so far, is why is New York City, so different from other cities? Like, what's so special about this? Why does New York City have such a unique relationship to its history? And so that we kind of went about a quest to answer that in putting this lecture together. And we actually started to look at the sequence of projects that we've done as almost like these seminal events in the history of the city. There were these moments in the development of the city that led to a particular event or phenomenon in the city that our projects kind of took ideas from, or took a rationale or logic from. And so that was kind of the start of the journey. So to start with a lecture, turn it into a book, and then come back to a lecture is a lot of fun. So thank you for entertaining us. So working in New York City is a blessing. The amazing history here is so deep and filled with interesting stories and anecdotes that it's great fodder to kind of spark the creative imagination. And so to understand the history, we're kind of a deeply analytical office, and so to understand the history, we hit the books. And one of the great books about New York City is The Power Broker, Robert Caro. If you guys haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Pick up a copy on your way home or download it. Electronically is better than the 2,000-page tome. Carrying that around the subway is kind of tough. And then another book, which is Island at the Center of the World by Russell Shorto. And that goes all the way back to the beginning and tries to explain the spirit of New York City, like what makes New York City different. And that book, the thesis is that the Dutch got here first. You had two naval powers, you had the Dutch and you had the English. And the Dutch got here first, and why that's important is because the Dutch practiced a type of like business-focused tolerance of the world, and that is just so clearly part of the New York City DNA, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit. But reading his book and understanding how that happened and how that continued to carry up to today, and this idea of tolerance that breeds diversity, which breeds an openness to change, is really, we think one of the defining features of kind of our relationship to history in New York. And then, also, we're younger than most European cities. Those of us who've been fortunate enough to live overseas, you go to Paris and Florence, and it's like a walking museum. You can't change anything in a lot of places. And fortunately, we're still a laboratory. We're still changing. So anyway, with that being said, kind of just go through quickly. So we've established a timeline here. We're going to use this timeline to take us through a number of projects. And so starting with this like Russell Shorto thesis, starting with the harbor, the Dutch, when they arrived in the early 1600s, immediately identified this land mass and the harbors as a very strategic port and place where business could be cultivated and international shipping and industry could be like positioned from. So it made a ton of sense geographically from the first moment they arrived. The Dutch immediately, unlike the English, they didn't have kind of a system of values and priorities that clouded who they would do business with. They would literally do business with anybody, and so right away, business and trade started with the Algonquin Indians that presided over parts of Manhattan and Long Island. Keep going. The business aspect and trade just took off, and up until the 1660s, when New Amsterdam was turned back to the English and became New York. When the English showed up, they for the first time ever, like waived all of their all of their bans on doing business with certain nationalities and religions, and they said, this place is humming, it's making a ton of money, we're going to do it differently here. And that was a big moment that the English adopted this approach to business, where business becomes this binding element between wildly different cultures, and allows for a tolerance that isn't happening in most places around the globe. So just a few more images of New Amsterdam to New York, and there are still kind of remnants or vestiges of the Dutch reign, most of them in Lower Manhattan, and then there's a few kind of whimsical examples. Although the next one I think is a recreation, some of the Dutch architecture that marked kind of their residency here. If you keep going. So now, just taking that as a framework and going to one of our early projects here, we go to 280 St. Mark's, which is in the Prospect Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn. And when we started looking at Prospect Heights, we immediately noticed something very strange about it. The lots are very different. For the architects that are among us, most lots are about 100 feet deep, 50, 25, 100 feet wide, whatever. They're very regular and orthogonal. But this was this deviated. If you go to the next slide, we started to see these kind of strange blocks with all these triangular and super deep lots, 130, 140 feet deep. And we researched and found that the Flatbush Path, which was the primary Indian trading route for the Algonquin on Long Island, then became the Flatbush Turnpike, then became Flatbush Avenue, and in each incarnation started to kind of drift around. And so Prospect Heights was actually developed around the Flatbush Turnpike in that version before it migrated south to Flatbush Avenue, and it had its own grid. And so when the commissioner's grid was transposed in the 1800s, there were all of these kind of collisions that happened and made all these kind of crazy lots. And so you have these kind of jagged buildings. If you go to the next slide, you just look at an aerial view, you see that these kind of buildings colliding, and that's all because of that development and kind of technology and organization that happened with the commissioner's grid across of New York City. So when we started thinking about the quality of the building that was going to go there, we had 150 linear foot elevation in the middle of this absolutely beautiful neighborhood that has a very strong rhythm, strong cadence, strong identity. And so the prospect of, no pun intended, of dropping a new building into Prospect Heights was one that we said, we can't, people want to come here for certain reasons, we have to respect the quality of this place and craft a building that kind of stands out but still belongs. And so we took the idea of these kind of collision angles that are throughout the sites and across the neighborhood and adopted them as a way to establish a cadence or rhythm that you saw with the rest of the townhouses. So we kind of took that bit of history and used that as a design device to kind of fit it into the neighborhood. So you keep going. We tried to take elements of contemporary culture in Brooklyn, and a lot of that was local makers. Wherever we could, we worked with guys that were making wood floors, a few blocks away, light makers. All of this has this kind of quality, and now it's going back 10 years since we started, but this quality of almost a refined but handmade quality to a lot of products and makers that were thriving in Brooklyn when we started this. And so we went to Peterson Bricks. For those of you Peter Zumthor fans, Zumthor kind of broke them out on the scene like a few years before we did this project, and we were excited to bring these beautiful handmade bricks. And when they were delivered, we got a call from the contractor who said, "Oh, this is terrible. All of these bricks are wrong. They're all messed up. What are we supposed to do?" And we had to calm them down. It's like, it's handmade quality. It's, So anyway, they got the hang of it and made a beautiful building with them. We kept what was previously a parking garage on the site, which ended up becoming kind of the exterior wall. And throughout our practice, we're always trying to take these kind of existing elements that'll add interest and add story to the place. And so this was no exception. So throughout, again, working with like local artists, local furniture maker Uhuru, who made these pieces in Red Hook, bringing in elements from the exterior design and that kind of angling that I mentioned as part of the hearth or fireplace and community room. And all of these spaces were just kind of about community and sharing. And then within the units, treating the kitchen island as a hearth or gathering place. We just see that more and more. When you entertain, you kind of stand around the island and spend time with family and friends. So, an example of millwork. 14 White Street is a really fun one, not too far from here. Our mission on this project was to kind of explore cast iron architecture and try to do a contemporary take on cast iron architecture, to take the elements behind cast iron design and revisit them 150 years later. So we had a ton of fun with this. So James Bogardus on the left, his factory, making all of these incredible cast iron buildings. And cast iron was a lot like Amish barn raising, where you would build the facade in the street and like lift it up into place. And it was, solid metal, cast metal, painted to look like stone, more economical than stone. So it was like the less expensive technology. And so we started to think, well, today, you don't have to go to all those great lengths. You don't have to make metal look like something else. Metal can be metal. It could be a lot lighter. It could be coupled with like a thermal envelope assembly, like a rain screen that could be high performance and way more efficient. And the metal can patina and be something beautiful. So it's kind of, the new technologies allow for different priorities and different ways of expressing things. And so we kind of played around with that. Here are examples of the cast iron. This is more in the Soho area than Tribeca, but nonetheless, Bogardus inspired designs. And this is a famous Bogardus project. I can't remember the address on it if you keep going. Here you go. This is a great story that we came across, a little anecdote. The city wanted to relocate this. This is the lay shops or lay stores. So they took it all apart, if you go to the next slide, and they put it in a field thinking it was just going to be left alone. And somebody came and took all of it. And then I think like 10 years later, they found it, they reassembled it, and then somebody stole it a second time, and then nobody's ever seen it again. So, the kind of funny stories you find when you're digging into history a little bit. So, as I mentioned, we're a really analytical office, and one of the things we study in these historic districts is the geometric composition, the balance, the proportions. In this case, it's window sizes, trying to understand the window sizes in the surrounding district and in the immediate vicinity of the building. Kind of a contemporary consideration in buildings that we do is larger windows. It's always about kind of like getting more light in there, taller ceilings, and so to try to take that contemporary consideration and reconcile that with the historic kind of smaller punched openings. We did those studies, and then we did this kind of synthesis of different apertures, like understanding. So as you're closer to the street, maybe we have smaller windows for more privacy, which open up larger as you go up through the building. Then within each floor, kind of smaller windows at bathrooms and bedrooms and private spaces, and larger public spaces. And so you get this kind of dynamic quality about the facade, which you can do with contemporary metal milling. It's all automated, so it's very easy to do it, compared to the cast iron, which is like a mechanical repetition where everything has to be the same. And so the result is this design, which is under construction right now. We're thrilled to see that completed next year. And so the facade is done with initially it was bronze, then it got a little expensive, so we changed the composition down to like a brass, but it'll patinate or patina over time and gradually get a little bit darker. You see line work on there, which is kind of the analog to the ornament that you see on cast iron, and which is made to look like somebody carved into stone. This is actually the line work used to automate the milling and fabrication process. So we love the idea that the story of how this thing is made becomes its ornament, becomes its texture. And then to get those different apertures and that dynamic quality, each one of the pilasters and piers and columns is expressed slightly differently with like larger openings. And so there's kind of a whole array of assembly types. This is also a passive building, so we took the space in between those columns and the insulation to do energy recovery ERVs, which is all part of the passive composition of the house. Yep.
Okay. So this takes us to 100 Barclay, and this story really starts at the sort of late 1800s and early 20th century with the advent of the telephone. And so what we saw after World War I was that the telephone became much more widely available, and so up until about 1920, people really started using the phone. And up until that time, the sort of phone utility buildings were scattered throughout the city in smaller buildings. And in 1926, the New York Telephone Company hired Ralph Walker to design a new headquarters and also a sort of switching station for the whole telephone utility. And Ralph Walker, who later on was considered the architect of the century, and quite a famous architect, was playing around with some ideas about sort of corporate identity, and this became a big thing for a lot of companies at the time, where corporations were hiring architects to design skyscrapers of much grander scale in order to sort of state their presence. And also kind of playing off of a theme of success, that was emanating in the country at the time, coming off of World War I, the economy was doing really well. So it was all about this kind of aspirational design for corporations. And this is a really great project, a wonderful sort of historic relic in that there's all kinds of amazing details throughout the building that were actually made by machines. So a very contemporary take on craft at the time, but bringing a lot of reference to the story of the telephone, or using the grapevine as a reference to connection and so forth. So it was really fun to get to know this building in terms of its history. And interestingly enough, it was also the original cover to Towards a New